Nazi Germany, from rearmament to ruin. In the early months of 1933, Germany was still living beneath the shadow of an old defeat. The First World War had ended 15 years earlier, but for many Germans, the war had never truly ended. It remained in the streets, in the empty factories, in the faces of veterans, in the hunger of families, and in the memory of a treaty that many believed had humiliated an entire nation. The Treaty of Versailles had reduced Germany to a weakened state. Its army was limited to 100,000 men. It was forbidden to have tanks, heavy artillery, military aircraft, and submarines. The navy, once a symbol of imperial pride, had been reduced to a small force with little more than symbolic power. To the victorious Allies, these restrictions were meant to prevent another war. But inside Germany they became a wound. People spoke of betrayal. They spoke of a stab in the back. They said Germany had not truly been defeated by enemy soldiers, but by politicians, revolutionaries, and traitors at home. In cafes, streets, factories, and veterans' halls, bitterness grew quietly. The old empire had fallen. The Kaiser was gone. The new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, struggled to survive. Inflation destroyed savings. Political violence filled the streets. Communists and right-wing nationalists fought for the future of the country. Many Germans no longer trusted democracy. To them, democracy had arrived with defeat, hunger, humiliation, and weakness. And then came the Great Depression. Factories closed. Workers lost jobs. Families fell into poverty. The old anger returned, stronger than before. Germany was searching for someone who could explain the pain, someone who could promise revenge, someone who could turn humiliation into power. And in that wounded atmosphere, one man rose: Adolf Hitler. When Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933, he did not arrive only as a politician. He arrived as a promise. He told Germans that their humiliation would end. He told them that Versailles would be broken. He told them that Germany would rise again. His voice was sharp, emotional, and forceful. He did not speak like a careful statesman. He spoke like a man declaring fate. He gave people enemies to blame, dreams to follow, and a leader to obey. He promised work to the unemployed, order to the frightened, strength to the humiliated, and glory to a nation that had forgotten how victory felt. But beneath the speeches, Hitler carried a darker vision. He did not simply want to restore Germany. He wanted to remake it. He wanted a country obedient to one party, one leader, one ideology, and one destiny. From his first days in power, the Nazi regime began reshaping Germany from the inside. It did not happen all at once. It happened step by step, until every part of society slowly bent toward the will of the state. Newspapers were controlled. Political opponents were arrested. Trade unions were destroyed. Books were burned. Schools were changed. Children were taught to worship the nation and obey the Führer. The radio became a weapon. Cinema became a classroom of loyalty. Music, posters, uniforms, flags, and marches became part of a vast emotional theater. At the center of this machine stood Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda. Goebbels understood that power did not live only in laws, police, or armies. It lived in the imagination. If a people could be made to see the world through the eyes of the regime, then they could be led almost anywhere. So Germany was told a story of rebirth, a story of betrayal avenged, a story of national unity, a story in which Hitler was not merely a leader, but the living voice of Germany itself. The message was repeated again and again. Germany was not preparing for war. Germany was restoring its dignity. Germany was not threatening Europe. Germany was freeing itself from injustice. And while these words filled the air, another project was unfolding quietly: rearmament. First, it was hidden. Factories expanded under civilian names. Military research continued behind harmless explanations. Pilots trained through gliding clubs and civilian aviation. Officers studied new tactics under restrictions and disguises. Roads were built across the country, especially the autobahns, presented to the world as proof of economic recovery and modern planning. But the autobahns also served another purpose. They could move troops quickly. They could move tanks, fuel, ammunition, supplies. Everything in Nazi Germany began to have two meanings: The public meaning was recovery. The hidden meaning was preparation. Hitler knew that if Germany challenged Britain and France too soon, it might be crushed before it was ready. So he moved slowly at first. He spoke of peace. He reassured foreign governments. He said Germany wanted only equality. But inside Germany, the tempo of rearmament increased. Steel mills burned through the night. Coal and iron became the blood of the new Reich. Chemical factories prepared synthetic fuel and rubber, because Hitler knew that in a future war Germany could be cut off from foreign supplies. Engineers designed tanks. Aircraft factories expanded. The Navy began thinking once again about submarines. And the army, limited by Versailles to 100,000 men, began preparing to become something far larger. To fund this expansion, the regime used clever financial tricks. One of the most important was the Mefo bill system, a hidden method of financing rearmament without showing the full cost in the official budget. It allowed Germany to spend vast amounts on weapons while disguising the scale of military production. The economy appeared to recover. Unemployment fell. Factories hired workers. Roads were built. Uniforms returned to the streets. To many ordinary Germans, it seemed like a miracle. But it was a recovery built on war preparation. Germany's economy was becoming dependent on conquest before conquest had even begun. In 1935, Hitler finally revealed part of what had been hidden. He announced the return of conscription. He declared the creation of the Luftwaffe, Germany's new air force. He openly rebuilt the army under a new name, the Wehrmacht. It was a direct violation of Versailles. Britain and France protested, but they did not act. And Hitler learned something important. The Western powers were afraid. They remembered the trenches of the First World War. They feared another slaughter. They hoped that perhaps Hitler only wanted to undo the harshest parts of Versailles. They hoped that if Germany were treated fairly, it might become satisfied. But Hitler was not seeking fairness. He was testing weakness. And every time he pushed and Europe stepped back, he grew more confident. The new German army was not simply a larger version of the old army. Its officers wanted a new way of war. They remembered the First World War II. The trenches, the mud, the artillery, the barbed wire, the years of blood for a few yards of ground. They wanted to avoid that forever. They wanted movement, speed, surprise, decision. Out of this desire came the idea later known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It was not a single official doctrine at first. It was a way of thinking, a collection of ideas shaped by experience, technology, and ambition. The goal was simple. Do not fight the enemy where he is strongest. Do not allow the war to become slow. Do not give the enemy time to think. Strike fast. Break through. Disrupt communication. Surround armies. Destroy morale. Win before the opponent understands the battle. Tanks would become the spearhead. Aircraft would strike airfields, bridges, supply lines, and command centers. Motorized infantry would follow the tanks. Radios would connect units in motion. Commanders in the field would make decisions quickly without waiting for every order from above. The enemy would be hit not only in his body, but in his mind. Confusion would become a weapon. Fear would become a weapon. Speed would become a weapon. One of the men most closely linked to this new thinking was Heinz Guderian. He believed tanks should not be scattered in small numbers to support infantry. They should be concentrated in armored formations, moving fast and deep into enemy territory. The old army had worshipped the line. Guderian worshipped movement. To make this work, tanks needed radios. Officers needed independence. Air power needed coordination with ground units. Logistics had to keep up with speed. It was a war of engines, wires, maps, fuel, and nerve. The Luftwaffe became the other half of the new method. Under Hermann Göring, Germany's air force grew rapidly. Fighters, bombers, and dive bombers filled the sky in training exercises and propaganda films. The Stuka dive bomber became one of the most feared symbols of German air power. It did not simply bomb. It screamed. Its sirens produced a terrifying sound as the aircraft dived toward the ground, turning fear itself into part of the attack. The Nazis understood something very old and very modern at the same time. A frightened soldier reacts slowly. A frightened civilian loses faith. A frightened commander makes mistakes. War was no longer only about killing. It was about shock. By the late 1930s, Germany had become a state organized for war. The economy served rearmament. The schools served ideology. The press served propaganda. The worker served production. The soldier served conquest. The child served the future army. The mother served the future race. The nation was being transformed into a single machine, and every machine needs fuel. The fuel was pride, fear, hatred, obedience, and the promise of destiny. In 1936, Hitler took another risk. He sent German troops into the Rhineland, a region that had been demilitarized under Versailles and later agreements. It was a gamble. The German army was still not ready for a major war. If France had acted firmly, the German troops might have been forced to withdraw. But France did not act. Britain did not act. The gamble succeeded. Hitler's prestige soared. To many Germans, it seemed he had restored national honor without firing a shot. To Hitler, it proved that boldness worked. In 1938, he moved again. Austria. Hitler had been born there, and many Austrians spoke German. Nazi influence had been growing inside Austria for years. In March 1938, German troops crossed the border. The annexation, known as the Anschluss, was greeted by many with cheers and flags. Austria disappeared into the Third Reich. Again, the Western powers protested but did nothing. Then came Czechoslovakia. In the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population, Hitler encouraged unrest and demanded union with Germany. Czechoslovakia was not weak. It had a strong army, modern industry, and fortified borders. But Britain and France feared war. At Munich, in September 1938, they agreed to allow Germany to take the Sudetenland. Neville Chamberlain returned to Britain saying he had secured peace. But peace built on surrender does not last. In March 1939, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. This time, he was not simply uniting Germans. He was conquering non-German territory. The truth was now clear. Hitler could not be satisfied. His next target was Poland. Poland stood between Germany and East Prussia. It also stood in the path of Hitler's dream of expansion to the east. He demanded the return of Danzig and rights across the Polish corridor. Poland refused. Britain and France now promised to defend Poland if Germany attacked. But Hitler had one more move. In August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. To the world, it was a non-aggression agreement between ideological enemies. In secret, it divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland would be split. Stalin would gain freedom to move in the Baltic states and other regions. Hitler had removed the danger of a two-front war, at least for the moment. Now he was ready. Before dawn on September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. The invasion was covered with lies. Nazi propaganda claimed that Germans in Poland were being persecuted. Then the regime staged the Gleiwitz incident, a fake attack on a German radio station, to make it appear as though Poland had attacked first. It was theater, a staged excuse for a war already planned. At 4:45 in the morning, German guns opened fire. Aircraft bombed Polish targets. Tanks crossed the border. Infantry advanced from several directions. Poland fought bravely, but it was outmatched. The German attack was fast, coordinated, and ruthless. The Luftwaffe hit airfields, roads, railways, bridges, and cities. Panzer divisions pushed deep into the country. Polish units were cut off before they could form stable defenses. The world saw Blitzkrieg in action. It was not magic. It was not invincibility. It was coordination, surprise, technology, and overwhelming force against an enemy unable to match the tempo. Then, on September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Poland was trapped between two powers. By the end of the month, the country had been crushed. Germany and the Soviet Union divided it between them. Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd. But in the West, little happened. This strange silence became known as the phony war. War had been declared, but the great armies did not yet clash. Soldiers waited behind defenses. Governments issued statements. The public expected something terrible, but for months, the Western Front remained quiet. Hitler used the pause. He prepared for his next blow. The target was France. France had prepared for another war with Germany by building the Maginot Line, a powerful chain of fortifications along much of its eastern border. It was modern, expensive, and strong, but it did not cover every path. To the north lay Belgium. Beyond Belgium lay the Ardennes, a forested region many Allied commanders believed was unsuitable for a major armored attack. The Germans saw an opportunity. In May 1940, Germany struck west. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg were invaded. The Allies moved into Belgium, believing this was the main German attack. But the true blow came through the Ardennes. German armored columns moved through narrow roads and dense forests, risking traffic jams and disaster. If the Allies had discovered the danger early and attacked decisively, the German plan might have collapsed. But they did not. At Sedan, German forces reached the Meuse River. Stuka dive bombers attacked French positions with terrifying intensity. The sound, explosions, dust, and panic overwhelmed defenders already uncertain of what was happening. German engineers crossed the river. Tanks followed. Then the armored spearheads raced west. The Allied armies in Belgium were cut off from the rest of France. British and French forces retreated toward the Channel. At Dunkirk, hundreds of thousands of soldiers became trapped. The sea was behind them. The German army was closing in. And then, for reasons still debated, the German armored advance paused. The halt gave Britain time. Operation Dynamo began. Warships crossed the Channel. Ferries crossed. Fishing boats crossed. Yachts, lifeboats, merchant vessels, and small civilian craft crossed. Under German air attack, more than 300,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated. Dunkirk became a miracle of survival. But it was not victory. Britain saved men. It lost equipment. Tanks, vehicles, artillery, ammunition, and supplies were left behind. France continued to collapse. On June 14th, German troops entered Paris. The French capital fell almost without a fight. On June 22nd, France signed an armistice with Germany. Hitler chose the same railway carriage at Compiègne where Germany had been forced to accept defeat in 1918. It was revenge staged as ceremony. France, which had endured 4 years of war in the First World War, had fallen in 6 weeks. The world was stunned. Germany seemed unstoppable. In Berlin, the victory was celebrated as proof of Hitler's genius. The people saw the Führer as a man chosen by history. The army saw itself as unbeatable. But victory can be dangerous, can teach the wrong lesson. After Poland and France, Hitler began to believe that every enemy would collapse if struck hard enough. He began to believe that speed could solve everything, that willpower could defeat geography, that ideology could overcome supply, that his instinct was superior to all caution. Only one major enemy remained in the West: Britain. In the summer of 1940, Britain stood alone. Hitler hoped it would make peace. He admired the British Empire in his own distorted way. He believed Britain might accept German control of Europe if allowed to keep its empire overseas. But Winston Churchill refused. Churchill had become prime minister during the crisis in France. He did not promise an easy road. He promised struggle, blood, toil, tears, sweat. He said Britain would fight on the beaches, in the fields, in the streets, and in the hills. He said Britain would never surrender. To invade Britain, Germany first had to control the sky. The Royal Navy was too strong. A German invasion fleet crossing the Channel would be vulnerable unless the Luftwaffe could destroy the Royal Air Force and protect the crossing. So began the Battle of Britain. German aircraft attacked radar stations, airfields, ports, and aircraft factories. The goal was to break RAF fighter command. But Britain had prepared. Its radar network gave early warning of incoming raids. Its operations rooms directed fighters efficiently. Its pilots flew Hurricanes and Spitfires over their own land. If a British pilot bailed out and survived, he could fly again. If a German pilot came down over Britain, he became a prisoner. The battle was exhausting. Young pilots flew several missions a day. Airfields were bombed. Hangars burned. Runways were cratered. Ground crews worked under pressure to repair aircraft, refuel fighters, reload guns, and fill bomb craters. The RAF bent, but did not break. Then Hitler shifted the bombing toward London and other cities. The Blitz began. Night after night, bombs fell. Homes burned. Families slept in underground stations. Firefighters worked through smoke and flame. Children were evacuated to the countryside. The city endured. But Britain did not surrender. The Luftwaffe lost aircraft and experienced crews. Germany failed to win control of the sky. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed. For the first time since the war began, Hitler had been stopped. Britain survived. And because Britain survived, Germany never achieved a secure Western peace. But Hitler's eyes had already turned east. To the Soviet Union. This had always been his deeper obsession. He hated communism. He wanted land. He wanted grain, oil, and what he called living space. He believed the Soviet Union was weak. He believed the Red Army would collapse like the French Army. He believed one great campaign could destroy the Soviet state before winter. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. It was the largest land invasion in history. More than 3 million German soldiers, joined by hundreds of thousands of Axis allies, crossed into Soviet territory. Army Group North moved toward Leningrad. Army Group Center drove toward Moscow. Army Group South advanced toward Ukraine. At first, the invasion seemed successful. The Luftwaffe destroyed thousands of Soviet aircraft on the ground. German tanks advanced rapidly. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Cities fell. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. Once again, Blitzkrieg seemed to be working. But the Soviet Union was not France. The distances were enormous. The roads were poor. The weather was harsh. The population was vast. The state could absorb losses that would have destroyed smaller countries. And the Red Army, though battered, did not disappear. Every German advance stretched the supply lines farther. Fuel became harder to deliver. Food became scarce. Vehicles broke down. Dust choked engines in summer. Mud swallowed roads in autumn. Then came winter. The German army had expected victory before the cold. It did not have enough winter clothing. Its vehicles were not prepared for extreme temperatures. Oil froze. Weapons jammed. Engines failed. Soldiers suffered frostbite. At the gates of Moscow, the German advance stopped. In December 1941, Soviet forces counterattacked. Fresh troops from Siberia, trained for winter war, struck the exhausted Germans. For the first time, the Wehrmacht was pushed back on a major front. The lightning war had failed. The campaign that was meant to last months became a war of exhaustion. And exhaustion was something Germany could not afford. The Eastern Front became a world of suffering. In winter, soldiers froze. In summer, they choked on dust. In autumn, they drowned in mud. Villages burned. Civilians suffered. Prisoners starved. The Nazi war in the East was not only a military campaign. It was a war of destruction. A war shaped by racism, ideology, and the desire to erase entire peoples and systems. But even as Germany bled, Hitler demanded more. In 1942, he looked south, toward the Volga River, toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, and toward a city with a name that carried symbolic power. Stalingrad. To Hitler, taking Stalingrad would be a political victory as well as a military one. It bore Stalin's name. To capture it would humiliate the Soviet leader. German forces approached the city after a long advance across the steppe. The Luftwaffe bombed Stalingrad heavily, turning much of it into rubble. But rubble favored the defenders. The Red Army turned every street, building, basement, factory, and stairwell into a battlefield. The fighting became close, slow, savage. Room by room, wall by wall. The Germans had been trained for movement. Stalingrad denied movement. It swallowed divisions in ruins. Soviet defenders under General Vasily Chukov stayed close to German lines, making it harder for German aircraft and artillery to strike without hitting their own troops. Snipers watched from broken windows. Machine guns waited in cellars. Factories became fortresses. One building, later known as Pavlov's house, became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The German Sixth Army pushed deeper into the city. But the deeper it went, the more trapped it became. In November 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. They did not attack the strongest German positions inside the city. They struck the weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces guarding the flanks. The lines collapsed. Soviet armies closed around Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army was encircled. Hitler refused to allow withdrawal. He ordered the army to hold. Göring promised that the Luftwaffe could supply the trapped troops by air. Could not. The soldiers inside the pocket froze, starved, and ran out of ammunition. Their letters home became quiet documents of despair. They no longer wrote of victory. They wrote of cold, hunger, shells, and waiting. In January 1943, the end came. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered. More than 90,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. Only a small fraction would ever return home. Stalingrad was more than a defeat. It was the breaking of a myth. After Stalingrad, the question was no longer whether Germany would conquer the East. The question was how long Germany could survive. The Red Army began moving west. Slowly at first, then with growing strength. Germany tried one more great offensive in the east. Kursk. In July 1943, German forces attacked a large Soviet salient around the city. Hitler hoped to regain the initiative and prove that German armor could still decide the war. But the Soviets knew the attack was coming. They built deep defenses, minefields, anti-tank guns, trenches, artillery positions, reserves. When the Germans attacked, they drove into a prepared killing ground. The battle became one of the largest armored clashes in history. German Tigers and Panthers faced Soviet T-34s. The ground shook with explosions. Smoke covered the fields. But the German attack failed. After Kursk, Germany would not regain the strategic initiative in the east. From then on, the Red Army moved forward. In the west, the Allies were also growing stronger. North Africa was lost. Allied forces invaded Sicily. Mussolini was overthrown. Italy signed an armistice. German troops occupied much of Italy and continued fighting, but the Axis position in the Mediterranean had been broken. At the same time, Allied bombers struck German cities. Hamburg burned. Berlin was bombed. Factories, railways, oil plants, and neighborhoods were attacked again and again. The bombing did not instantly break Germany, but it stretched its defenses, damaged production, and brought the war home to civilians who had once watched victories in newsreels. The German economy, built for war, was now being crushed by war. Still, the regime continued. Goebbels spoke of total war. Factories used forced labor from occupied Europe. Women, prisoners, foreign workers, and concentration camp inmates were drawn deeper into the machinery of survival and destruction. The more Germany lost, the more brutal it became. The Nazi state did not soften as defeat approached. It hardened. Then came June 6, 1944. D-Day. Operation Overlord. The Allies landed in Normandy. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces crossed the English Channel and stormed the beaches of France. Utah. Omaha. Gold. Juno. Sword. At Omaha Beach, the fighting was especially terrible. Men landed under machine gun fire, artillery, smoke, and chaos. Many died before reaching the sand. Others crawled forward through water, blood, and obstacles. But the landings succeeded. The Allies established a foothold. Germany now faced a true two-front war. In the east, the Soviet Union was advancing. In the west, the Allies were returning to Europe. In August 1944, Paris was liberated. The city that had fallen in 1940 now rose again. German forces retreated. But Hitler refused to accept reality. He demanded counterattacks. He blamed generals. He imagined rescue from armies that existed only on maps. In December 1944, he launched one final gamble in the west. The Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. German forces attacked through the forests of Belgium, hoping to split the Allied armies and capture Antwerp. At first, the attack surprised the Allies. Snow, fog, and confusion helped the Germans. But Germany lacked fuel. It lacked reserves. It lacked air power. It lacked time. Bastogne held. The weather cleared. Allied aircraft returned. The offensive failed. Germany had spent its last strength. By early 1945, the Third Reich was dying. From the east, the Red Army crossed into Germany. From the west, American, British, Canadian, and French forces crossed the Rhine. German cities became ruins. Refugees moved through snow and broken roads. The same Germany that had once marched across Europe now watched Europe march into Germany. And at the center of it all stood Berlin, the capital of Hitler's empire, the city where the Nazi dream would end. In April 1945, Soviet forces began the final assault. More than 1 million soldiers moved toward Berlin. The defenders were a desperate mixture of regular troops, SS units, old men, police, and boys from the Hitler Youth. The battle was hopeless, but it was fought with terrible violence. Artillery pounded the city. Buildings collapsed. Civilians hid in basements and subway tunnels. Streets became battlefields. Inside the Führer bunker beneath the city, Hitler lived in a shrinking world of maps, anger, and delusion. He still issued orders. But many of the units he commanded existed only on paper. He blamed betrayal. He blamed weakness. He blamed everyone except himself. Outside, Berlin burned. Inside, the last rituals of the regime continued. On April 29, Hitler married Eva Braun. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. The man who had promised Germany eternal glory died beneath the ruins of the capital he had led into destruction. 2 days later, Berlin fell. The Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. But victory did not feel simple. Europe was broken. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were dead. Millions more had been displaced. Germany itself was destroyed, occupied, and divided. The empire Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years had lasted only 12. It had risen from humiliation, anger, propaganda, and rearmament. It had conquered with speed. It had ruled with terror. And it had collapsed in fire. The story of Nazi Germany's rise and fall is not only a story of armies. It is a story of how a wounded society can be led toward madness. How economic recovery can hide militarization. How propaganda can turn lies into belief. How speed can look like destiny. How victory can create arrogance. And how a nation that gives itself completely to war may discover too late that war consumes everything. In 1933, Hitler promised to restore Germany's pride. By 1945, Germany was a landscape of ruins. In the beginning, there were parades, flags, speeches, and promises. At the end, there was silence, broken stone, burned cities, lost families, and a question that history still asks. How could so many people follow one man so far into darkness? The answer is not simple. It lies in fear, humiliation, anger, ambition, obedience, propaganda, and the human desire to believe that suffering can be cured by power. But power without truth becomes destruction. And destruction, once unleashed, does not stop at the borders drawn by those who begin it. Nazi Germany rose like a storm, fast, loud, blinding. But storms do not build. They tear apart. And when the storm passed, Europe was left to count the dead, rebuild the cities, and remember what happens when a nation mistakes conquest for greatness. History does not sleep. It waits. And when people forget the cost of hatred, it begins to whisper again.